right then, we'll get started. Mm, um, I feel like I was supposed to do this maybe a little bit of time ago, but I think this is a good time to really work through where I've come from and where I am today with the work that I'm doing with this particular project in itself. So let's begin with me sharing my screen. All right. So this project started off maybe like the beginning of January, the end of December of last year, 2020. Um, and it kind of began as a continuation of other projects that I had embarked on, um, with those projects being based around diving deeper into the center and the core of who I was and who I am and who I'm becoming. Um, and that sort of led me to wanting to dive deeper into where I've come from, family lineage wise. In the beginning, I kind of was just a bit naive about it. Like, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna find a bunch of stuff and I'm gonna, put it together and, figure it out and find how it works together. Um, but as I began that journey, I quickly came to realize that this journey was not going to be as closed, open, and shut as I had imagined it to be. And though I knew that there was a history of migration and movement as a result of the slave trade, transatlantic slave trade, I just knew that my family knew something, you know what I mean? And that couldn't be further from the truth, what I came to realize. And so a lot of what I had to do was tap into my intuition to really figure out what was living inside of me emotionally, and how those emotions were sort of connecting to visions and memories of past lives and memories of the stories that I've heard over the years. In addition to tapping into those memories, I started asking questions like who is, what is, where did, if we are, then what are. I got a lot of answers. Some of it didn't make sense. A lot of it didn't make sense. So what I decided to do was to really tap into some like research. And I think that was really important for, I think, helping me to situate the narrative that I am currently trying to put together within space and time. Because those narratives have a social history, right? And this is how I know that these migrations has a relationship to some of the histories of the movements of the people here in America, right? And my family being from the Middle Passage as well, right? This is the West Indies. This is what they call the West Indies. This is also the Caribbeans, right? And the Central America. What I know historically, what I found out historically about that movement of people, about my movement, lineage-wise, right, had everything to do with some of that history. And as I began to read that history, I realized that some of it is fact, some of it is fiction. And in between that fact and that fiction is the story that is connecting to me. And how I make that connection is through literally touching, putting my fingertips into the soil, going to the lands, sitting with the lands, connecting with the lands, and really letting the land know that I had not forgotten, right? So in the beginning of this research, this is January, this is December-ish. I'm sort of coming off of this phase of, artistically, I'm coming off of this phase of drumming. So I've gotten into sound art, which became super important to this connecting to land piece. And as I'm coming with this sound instruments to I would like to say, like intersect the current vibrations on a particular location, on a site-specific location. So in interrupting, intersecting, or inputting myself into the specific site, I found myself at that time period, it's January, and me, messing with the sound vibrations. I found myself, and I found my memories warping in time as I played the djembe drums, They say the beats, they say the drum, they say the djembe is the heartbeat of the community, the heartbeat of the culture, right? It's the heartbeat. And that heartbeat carries the rhythm. And the rhythm carries the movement, right? And so when you intersect and you insert yourself within a beat, within a rhythm that has already been moving, you sort of change the vibrations, and you change the flow, and you change the tempo at which the rhythm and the movement is going, right? So I'm thinking about this, the sound class that I was in, it was like a psychoacoustic class, right? And so this psychoacoustic class was talking very specifically about the ways spirit intersects with sound. It couldn't have been more divine, right? And I was just thinking, like, I wasn't prepared to get into sound just yet, but somehow I ended up in this class talking about feeling and channeling, right? Channeling this energy. So moving forward, knowing that I wanted to do this project is, that's like sort of continuing this journey of figuring out how I arrive here at this time and in this space, right? And that journey leading me to sort of the stories and the narratives of the people who come before me, and the research that also sort of encapsulates that as well. I began to research, and this right here, what's on the screen right now, is the beginning of that research phase. And so at the beginning of that research phase, I'm sort of going through social history, and in that social history, I'm really taking a look at what they call the document of discovery. And the document of discovery from 1492, I almost said 1942, 1492, written and signed to do this sort of venturing out into the world and discovering certain things, or discovering lands, quote unquote, right? This is what allowed Christopher Columbus to have the resources necessary to then travel, right? So, I'm starting my journey there. I'm starting my journey and my research there, just trying to figure out the lineage, right? Just trying to figure out the travel, just trying to figure out at what point did they stop. Matter of fact, what point did they reach a crossroad and say, okay, we've claimed this land, we need more people to work, and then where we're gonna get these people from, right? There's a huge gap in between that, but that gap has something to do with the development of race and this sort of classification system that sort of um, brings or takes African people outside of um, the human tree, right? The tree of humanity, in order to justify um, the dehumanization process necessary in order to create this sort of slave labor or this free labor kind of market. Um, and so, I'm researching this sort of thing. At the beginning, this is my project description. Again, I'm following my family's lineage in time, from the Midwest towards the Deep South. I'm just dissecting my own truth, of being a product of a people who has existed in multiple places and who have worked and returned to a variety or varying type of soils all over the earth, right? And so this is that speaking to touching the land and touching the land to very site-specific places and connecting with that land and letting the land know, I haven't forgotten you, and the people who worked this land have not forgotten you as a result of my sort of connection, right? And my, my connection to my lineage and my connection to my ancestors, right? And so for the purposes of this section of research and self-discovery, and me sort of knowing that this is only tipping the top, or like the tip on the iceberg, right? So I know I'm going to probably find some more things, but this is just where I'm starting. So for the purposes of this section of research and self-discovery, right, knowing that this is an entire process, it's probably going to be a lifelong process. But as I go through that process, every portion of that journey is really important and valid, a valid part of my own development as an artist, but even bigger than just being an artist, me as a human being and my soul within this, you know what I mean, in this ecosystem, right, of consciousness, honestly. So I'm thinking about now, but I'm also thinking about, my connection to everything that is, right? So in this particular journey of self-discovery, I am focusing on my family's transition within the States, which later on turns out to be something a lot more more elaborate and goes past the United States. And here in this research reference, again, that doctrine of discovery is 1493 instead of 1492. And it was called the Papa Bull, or it was one of the Papa Bulls. And I want to say that I used the map, the 13 colony map from 1714, and when they came and they were like mapping out things, I want to say I used that at some point to do something with. I feel like once we go to the next slide, we'll figure it out. But I can't remember because I'm not using it anymore. It's not, it's no longer relevant to where I am and where I've grown and where I've become, right? Where I've become. That's kind of an interesting statement in itself, and very intentionally so. So where I've become is sort of also challenging this idea of how to engage with a story that is very nonlinear. And it's nonlinear because I'm talking about the past, present, and future all in the same sort of breath and time space.
It's 2:45.
Oh, thank you. So there's something called mimetic engulfment, which I've been like sort of, I would say infatuated with. I've been kind of infatuated with it, mainly because it just flips it flips the way in which you engage on its head in the physical, right? So it's not just a virtual challenge of how you engage, and I feel like the virtual challenge of how you engage with images and moving images is through like, what is it called? Experimental work and experimental filmmaking, and so I love experimental filmmaking for that reason. But I definitely feel like the virtual space is only one element to our existence, which also incorporates this this physical aspect as well, and of course the spiritual aspect as well, and what I, sort of speak to throughout the different themes that I'm exploring, right? And so in this physical space, the focus of mimetic engulfment has everything to do with the installation and its design to really challenge the senses and the sense of self and its relativity to the space around it and the objects that are in a particular space. And in that particular space that you're perceiving those objects, you're also getting a different perception of self, depending on where those objects are placed, especially when there's something that's familiar that's placed in an unfamiliar manner, right? So these sensations of loss of self and this reorientation of the nowness and this reorientation of where you are right now, or where you are in the present, is a thing that I'm really most interested in evoking, because it's an introspective look at the absence of presence, right? And this idea, or these binaries, or these binaries that do become, balanced once you bring them together, right? A little bit of this, a little bit of that, but when, one is isolated from the other, then it becomes sort of an imbalance. So taking a look at these dualities, right? And these dualities in balance, right? And so the duality of absence and the duality of presence, right? And then bringing it together in balance, right? What does that look like? And what does that look like internally too, for us to be questioning dualities, right? And questioning dualities even further to take a look at darkness and light, and to also take a look at death and life, right? And as I speak about ancestors and I speak about those who come before me, it's that liminal space that I'm also speaking to when I'm going in between the dualities, or when I'm going in between the polars, and when I'm going in between the binaries, right? So this duality, or these dualities, right, are all important elements of the story being told or being retold, right? Because the now and the future and the past are all sort of like collapsing together. And so through these works, I want to present it in a space to help narrate the movement through that time that I allude to, and that time being past, present, and future. And so challenging and reorienting objects within a space allows space for us to really think about this sort of engulfment in a familiar space that then becomes unfamiliar once you're sort of enclosed in a particular space, or you're sort of encapsulated within in a particular space. So what I wanted to do with this, or what I am doing with this, is incorporating video into that. And you can think about mimetic engulfment being related to what a theater does to you when you're in a space. You're sort of engulfed in a space, in a black space, right? In this kind of a black box. And you're sort of sitting down, you got a whole installation, right? This is a whole video installation, right? And you're engulfed in what the object of focus is. An object of focus is oftentimes a projector that is projecting a video. So one way to really flip that on its head within this physical space and really challenge that perspective of that particular style of mimetic engulfment is something that I really am sort of, again, infatuated with, sort of exploring how to do that, and the ways it feels when you do that, when you take yourself outside of the norm of how you've been conditioned to view videos, right? And our norm of how we've viewed videos have been theaters, right? So there's this idea called video atopia, right? It's a suspension, right? We're flipping theater on its head, right? And we're incorporating some objects into the space, but it's a suspension. Ooh. We're still here? All right, we're still here. So it's a suspension in an alternative reality in which our bodies are subordinate to eyesight. So we're kind of like in a comatose state, and this alternative reality is the reality that we're now immersed within, right? And so this idea is sort of coming from this book on installation art that I have been reading through a class, and that book was written by Claire Bishop. And in this video, Atopia sort of like example, I think she used Julian Isaac, yeah, or Isaac Julian, something like that. I think his name has two first names, but we're using that as an example to really just discuss how we take ourselves out of this sort of like comatose state and really challenge ourselves to really observe and really look at the perspective of reality in a different way. Okay, so to illuminate this installation, this is me talking about the installation and relating it to Video Utopia. To illuminate this installation and these objects that I'll be putting in the installation space or in the space itself, I would be depending on the light from the video projections within the space. And the ultimate goal is for the viewers to not just watch or bear witness to the film, but to be deeply embedded with an experience that goes beyond the limitations of how we've been socialized to observe and perceive mass media. So again, that virtual space being that independent, or what is it called? The virtual space being the experimental filmmaking, and the physical space for me being this mimetic engulfment through this sort of video utopia kind of environment that is created. And so, again, challenging socializations, and challenging socializations not just in the virtual space, but challenging socializations within the physical space as well. And really challenging the notion that we have to like view things the way mass media has set it up or designed it for us to view, right? So that's a theory, that's a thought. I think next I'm just gonna show you, maybe talk you through a little bit, but just show you where we are and what it looks like, because now I'm jumping into the visuals, right? And with the theory and with the reference points and with the research as my backbone for exploring these ideas, right? As I go through the stories, as I sort of unveil and sort of move between spaces in time, this is where my train of thought is sort of having its foundation from, right? So I was thinking about sort of this folklore and this tale around how some people say how the beginning of time began, right? And essentially it's the clouds, and from the cloud a chain comes down, and from the chain comes a sprinkle of dirt, and a chicken comes down and spreads this dirt around. You also have some conch shells as well. My bad, it's not conch shell. I keep saying conch shells, but what I mean is cowrie shells. And with all of this material then creates the earth that we know today. And of course, there's been this sort of tale of molded from clay type things. And so I feel like that molded from clay type analogy has come through from so many different generations. I really wanted to like make sure that I put my hands in clay. And so as I put my hands in clay, this is sort of what I've come up with to relate that to like the origins of the story and the connections to the different cultures that I've sort of, I know my family to have derived certain stories from, and derived certain narratives from, and derived certain like certain mysteries from as well, right? So in this chain, I had the idea to just build build beads, and build some cufflinks and build some certain things. We use different like clays to do that. And so as I was building the neck cuffs and the porcelain beads, and the different, layouts here, I had some interesting, feedback from folks, and I like some of the feedback, and you'll get to see how that sort of like incorporated into the work as I, move forward and progress in, where this sort of like this initial draft sort of move forward and progress, right? So this is where I started from, of course, having the clouds be made of some sort of cotton, or some sort of like material that was natural and organic, really symbolizing some of the crops that were sort of essential to the building of the economic system that really created the foundation for, the 13 colonies that was here in America, right? And so some of those crops were tobacco, and tobacco was one of the first companies that was incorporated here. Then you also have corn, and you also have cotton, right? And some of those things were being exported to Europe to really, I guess, build their infrastructure as well, and to supply their people, and to really, again, build that wealth, right? And so in addition to that wealth being built with these sort of like materials, one of the things that was mentioned to me was the importance of porcelain, and how the history of porcelain also relates to this idea of opulence. I mean, it's something that I hadn't thought about before, but that really sort of shaped and transformed the way in which I saw this porcelain integrating within the work itself. And so you'll see in later editions how I sort of transitioned this porcelain in a way that sort of made sense for me conceptually as it related to the story itself. So this porcelain being associated with opulence, but in order to attain this opulence, in order to attain this porcelain, the process by which it was, sort of learned was through some sort of, violent sort of takeover in this complicated, not really as complicated, but just really just kind of like violent history with China, right? Or this violent history with Asia. And, again, this is along that, colonization sort of time period. But in that colonization time period, I think what's important to note is that people were going in and grabbing things, right? This is like a scramble for knowledge. This is a scramble for expansion. It's a scramble for intellectual development. And so this porcelain was about the development, right? And the civilization, or the development of the civilization, or the evolution of the civilization that was moving towards this quote unquote thing, enlightenment, right? And I love the article, maybe it's a book, Dialect of the Enlightenment period, or something like that. Walter Benjamin or stuff like that. Harno, something like that. Anyways, I really love that article talking about mass sameness within mass media, this idea of coming together to create this sort of sameness, and this sameness being sort of an illusion created around this idea of enlightenment, right? And so I feel like this idea of enlightenment sort of translates here as well when we're talking about, and translate in a lot of ways when we're talking about art, when we're talking about these things that are made, when we're talking about skill sets, right? And bringing those skill sets to a particular place, or exporting those.
It's 3 o'clock.
I want to say excavating, right? And excavating for the purposes of building a sense of enlightenment. And through that excavation came the underdevelopment, because it wasn't just an excavation for sustainability, it was an excavation for like this conquering and defeating kind of like mentality, right? And that's what we've seen over time, right? So again, this long history of porcelain really sort of became something that I was made aware of through some of the artists who I've talked to along the way. So I did something a little bit different with this porcelain, but this was that initial thought with the beads and with the chains coming down from the heavens. Again, with that video atopia in the installation space, having people walk through the space as the video projection is sort of projecting onto these items, but also reflecting onto the back or the enclosed or the walls that are enclosing this space. So yeah, this is about January. This is where I started. I'm gonna stop recording here.